Hello, welcome to The Wandering Drew. I am Drew. On today's episode, I'd like to reveal the next trip that I'm going to be taking. This is one that I've been planning for several months. I have pushed this one around to accommodate proper healing after my injury earlier this year on the Panasonic Trail. I hope you'll stick around and join me. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to reveal the trip that I'm going to be taking very, very shortly. And I've been planning this trip more or less since July of 2020. Obviously, there were some travel restrictions then that I wasn't able to complete. And additionally, I had some other hikes that I wanted to do first, most notably some up in Panasonic, and then I had an injury that I had to push this one back. I wanted to do this during the cooler weather. However, that's not always a good idea. Weather is unpredictable in this area of the country. There could possibly be snow, so I decided to push it off to the warmer weather. I was hoping for spring. Unfortunately, with the injury and the other trip that I just completed when I went up to Georgia and in the Pensacola area, this one got pushed back again. And I can't remember what exactly led me to this trip. If it was an article I read, a book, a podcast, a web search. Most likely I came across this path when I was doing research on trails either in the area or another trail, and you know how one thing leads you to another, and I came across this trail. As I mentioned before, I'm into history, and this trail is well steeped in history and delivers it in a big way. So I've kept you waiting long enough, but I'm going to ask you to just stick with me a little bit longer. And I'll explain why I'm doing this trail now. There's not a lot of elevation change, and there's not a lot of hazards in terms of walking the path. And it is more or less smooth. The surface of this trail is mostly dirt. A couple of places it varies, but mostly it's just a dirt path. The trail is also straightforward, easy in being able to follow it. So you don't have to worry about losing your way. And since this will be the first real long distance, multi-day test of my ability to hike since my injury, I think this is a good intermediate hike. It's not challenging in the sense of the elevation change or the difficulty. It's challenging in the fact that it's a long distance and a multi-day trip. I wanted to do this one earlier, but I decided to do part of the Panasonic trail, and then I was going to try to do this one. Unfortunately, I got an injury, so I had to push this one back until after I was better. So I'm doing it now. I was hoping to do this in the colder weather, but unfortunately, that really didn't happen. It might be better to do this in the spring when it's a little cooler, but I'm going to have to unfortunately do it in June in the heat. I'm hoping I'm not going to regret that, because I really don't like hiking in the heat. I'll do it, but of course cold weather is always preferred. So all these things I mentioned, the desire to do a multi-day trip, kind of like an intermediate, like a training kind of situation, and the weather and everything just lining up, has led me to do this trail now. And what trail is it that I'm talking about? Well, I have decided to hike the 184.5 miles of the Chesapeake and Ohio Trail. The Chesapeake and Ohio, or C&O Trail, is more a towpath than a trail. This path goes from Georgetown, or Washington, D.C., to Cumberland, Maryland. It roughly follows the shoreline and course of the Potomac River in most places. Additionally, there are several historic sites along the path and the river as it winds its way through the land. And this corridor, the Potomac River, and this towpath has seen the history of our nation before it was even a nation. It's been there from the beginning. And I keep calling it a towpath because this path, or towpath, was formed when a canal was built in order to move barges up and back because the river is impassable. And next to the canal, they built this pathway for animals, pack animals, mostly mules, to be able to pull the barges as they went along the canal. The canal was able to use water from the river in order to float the barges. And using a series of locks all along the towpath, they were able to move the barges up and down with the elevation change as they proceeded along the pathway. I don't want to get all into the history of this area in the towpath because I'm hoping to do some of that during the hike. But this path is a look back into the history of our nation, and seemingly unrelated events can somehow tie into each other. So all history is not that random. As I mentioned, the towpath starts in Washington, D.C. or Georgetown, and it's lined with cobblestones, and then it quickly goes into a dirt path for the majority of the trail. There are also numerous remnants of the original canal and the locks that were used. Part of the trail has been moved or lost and recreated. The actual canal, some of them have been filled in or developed over the years, but a lot of the trail exists on its original path. I'm also hoping to bring some of these structures, the locks and the houses, to you during my video. And this path is frequently used by cyclists more than hikers. Most of the videos I saw were of cyclists doing this trail in anywhere from 3 to 5 days. Any video I usually saw of a hiker was usually a section hike, but not longer than that. And like hiking the AT, there are a few places that you can get supplies or resupply yourself while walking. Some of them are for food, like from stores that you can do takeout or pick up a meal, but not necessarily resupply. Additionally, like the AT, there are also a network or a whole course of free, yes, free places to stay, campsites that you can use to stay at while hiking this pathway. And they're free to the public to use. The only rule that they ask you to abide by is that you don't stay at any one site for more than 1 day. So clearly it's intended that you have a place to stay while hiking the whole towpath along the way. And they're interspersed out at fairly regular intervals, but especially on the east end, they're a little further apart. So this makes some logistical planning necessary because unlike a regular trail, you're not supposed to just stop whenever you get tired, find the campsite and pitch your tent. You're supposed to go to the campgrounds and camp there. So if they're at a fixed point, you have to decide whether you're going to stop early or push to the next one. And there's a lot of variables in that too. How are you feeling that day? What's the weather, the trail conditions? Any of these things could influence your planning. So it's very, very hard for me logistically to plan out where I'm going to be more than a day or two, because if you're feeling good one day, you decide to walk more, that throws every single day off. So I'm not going to get all bogged down in the planning, but roughly to say that I'll be flying to Washington, D.C., and this will be the first time that I'm actually flying with my gear to go hiking. So there's some logistics involved in that. Some items are not allowed on the airplane. Some items are allowed on the airplane, but they have to go into baggage. So the items that are not allowed on the plane at all, whether they're in baggage or not, I am going to procure once I arrive in Washington. Fortunately, REI has a store in downtown Washington, D.C., and that'll be my first stop once I land. So I can get those items, and then I'll walk a couple of miles to my hotel where I already have reservations. I've also made a plan for a return ticket, but I have a feeling that those dates won't really coincide with the finishing of this hike because, as I mentioned, it's really hard to plan your mileage. I'm also only planning on taking 1, maybe 2 down days or Nero days during this hike. So I'm really hoping to do several consecutive days of hiking, putting on the mileage. And as I've done in the past, sitting here in the comfort of my home, I'm planning on doing 15 miles per day. But I think that I will be able to exceed that on several days. And as long as my body holds up, then I think I'll be able to finish faster than I planned for. As I mentioned, there are a couple of places to resupply, but a lot of them are not right near the trail. And in doing my research, since most of the information out there is for cyclists, it's much easier to go resupply on 2 wheels than 2 feet. Going a mile out of your way, or a mile and a half out of your way on a bicycle, is much easier and a better pill to swallow than doing it on 2 feet. I'm looking forward to this challenge and this conditioning. As I mentioned, because there's not a severe elevation change and the path is fairly easy to walk on, I think I'll be able to make the mileage. I'm hoping that my body will be able to hold up to the multiple day distance. So you can see by this, my plans are pretty fluid but firm in the sense of I know when I'm starting. So I'm going to start in mid-June, and I hope to be finished by the beginning of July. And as I mentioned, outside of the first 3 to 4 days, I have no idea where I'll be and when I'll be done. It's all very speculative based on how I'm able to hike along. This trail for me will end in Cumberland, Maryland. And from there, more than likely, I'll get a train to take me back to Washington, D.C., and then fly back home. Now, I've already booked my return ticket, but I've left a couple of days in between just in case I take longer. But I'm actually hopeful, as I always am, that I'll finish on time or earlier. So if I can't reschedule my flight, I guess I'll have to spend a couple of days in the Washington, D.C. area. Well, there's so much to do there, and with restrictions getting easier and easier all the time, I'm sure I'll find some things to do to keep me busy. So that's my announcement. I'm hoping to do a gear video in the next week or so as well that I'll release prior to me going on the hike. And I've made a couple of changes, and I'm going to try and travel light. And because of some of the area that I'll be going, it won't be as remote as some areas. I've made some changes to my gear as well, in addition to trying to get lighter. As with my other hikes, I'm planning on recording videos as I go along and posting them. I'm anticipating that I will have service the majority of this hike, as it's not in a remote area. I think the ability for me to have service will pretty much be present throughout the hike, with maybe a minimal of 1 or 2 places where service will be lacking. So that's going to be it for that. As always, I thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch these videos. I appreciate the comments and the mostly positive feedback I get from you. Please feel free to take some extra time out and give me a thumbs up or leave a comment, good, bad, or otherwise. Till we meet again.